The story of North America begins with its waterways. From the fishing waters off the East Coast to the vast inland seas known as the Great Lakes, magnificent ships of sail and steam have charted the course of our nation's history, but not without a tragic cost. More than 240,000 square kilometers in size, the Great Lakes make up the largest inland body of fresh water on the planet. Friday, November 7th, 1913. The Great Lakes have never been busier.
Probably the best way to think about the Great Lakes in 1913 is to think of it as the 401 of the day. For the movement of people, it was a very important transportation route. Also for the movement of goods.
On this particular Friday, on the northern shores of Lake Superior, Captain William Wright supervises the loading of the James C. Carruthers, the newest and largest freighter on the lake.
The Carruthers had been launched that same year, and the Carruthers was a big vessel. It was 529 feet long, and it was a steel ship.
The Wexford is everything the big freighter is not: older, smaller, and slower.
She was a salty or an ocean design, so she was peculiar in that she wasn't typical of what you'd see on Lake Huron. She was one of those vessels that was at the crossing point between sail and steam.
Wexford Captain Bruce Cameron is watching the skies. He is experienced enough to know that the witch of November is at hand.
November is one of the most volatile months because you still have the warm southerly tropical moisture coming in from the Gulf of Mexico. And usually in mid-late October, you start to see some really good surges of polar air into the Great Lakes. And what happens is that you get this clash of the atmosphere and the air masses, and you can develop some strong storms, especially with the wind.
For captains and crews across the Great Lakes, there is only time for one or two more deliveries.
They worked very, very hard during the actual shipping season, especially towards the end of the season. The pressure was on by the first and second week of November to get those last trips in to get that profit margin up.
In Sarnia, on the southern shores of Lake Huron, a small Canadian freighter, the Regina, is being loaded. This is Captain Ed McConkey's first season as the ship's skipper. He's eager to squeeze in one more trip, despite storm signals hoisted in the harbor. Like most shipmasters, McConkey is suspicious of any warning issued by the Weather Bureau.
Weather prediction at the time in 1913 was pretty much on a mold where they looked at surface observations and had contact with the different offices upwind from them. It was all very antiquated and very limited.
It was said that shipping lines hired men who would use the barometer only as a coat hook. You know, they said hang their coat over the barometer or the hat over the barometer. These were men who were used to ignoring weather warnings.
One man who cannot ignore the warnings is Milton Smith, assistant engineer on the Charles S. Price. The Price is the pride of the Great Lakes, and few crew members voluntarily leave before season's end. But something tells Milton Smith that he must do just that, and it has to be today. His chief engineer, John Groundwater, cannot believe that Smith is willing to give up his end-of-season bonus for a vague premonition, but cannot change the crewman's mind. Friday afternoon, November 7th, 1913. The configuration of red and white lanterns at weather posts indicate gale force winds of 112 kilometers per hour or more. Several ships have already left port.
In 1913, we had no hurricane warning on the Great Lakes, and because it was believed that we would not have a hurricane force storm.
Ships already on Lake Superior are hit by the first punch of the storm. The largest of the Great Lakes becomes a giant cauldron of writhing water and yowling winds. The LC Waldo leaves port 2 hours before storm warnings are raised. Now, an angry sea is trying to tear it apart. Pounding waves smash into the deckhouse at the bow of the ship, which encloses the captain's bridge and wheelhouse. It shatters windows, tears away the roof, and destroys the ship compass and steering system. To cross the long, low deck of the Waldo during a storm is madness. Captain John Duddleson and his wheelsman have no choice.
And the captain and the wheelsman went to the emergency steering platform at the stern of the ship, and they tied themselves there. And the captain had a hand compass and a lantern, and the wheelsman steered and the captain called the course throughout the storm.
Throughout Saturday morning, November 8th, the storm grows steadily worse. Saturday afternoon, the winds suddenly change direction.
Basically, the Arctic air was being pulled in all the way to the east coast, and then what happened is it just pulled it right back toward the Great Lakes and the eastern Great Lakes, and then you have that cyclonic flow going on, and as you imagine, like a spinning top.
With the change in the wind comes a rapid drop in temperature. Ice builds up on battered masts and wheelhouses as the storm-stricken ships try to find shelter.
They didn't know how much they were drifting to port or to starboard as a result of the wind that was blowing on the side of the ship. The visibility would drop to the point where you couldn't even see the bow of the ship.
Sunday, November 9th, 1913. On Superior's south shore, the Henry B. Smith, one of the largest freighters on the lakes, is anxious to complete one last trip. Less than 30 kilometers out of port, the Smith and its crew of 25 are swallowed whole by the seething waters of Lake Superior.
Ships were trying to meet their economic deadlines towards the end of the shipping season. The timing couldn't have been worse, and with this huge change in weather, they got caught.
It is only by sheer chance that other ships have escaped the clutches of the Lake Superior storm. Both the James C. Carruthers and the Wexford find shelter near Sault Ste. Marie. Although warnings are still posted, Captain Bruce Cameron and the other shipmasters feel that the worst is over.
The local interpretation of what was happening was that things were getting better and the winds were dropping, the barometer was rising, so Bruce Cameron set out with the Wexford, as did a number of other vessels.
Many of those vessels are at the other end of Lake Huron, including the Regina and the Charles S. Price. As the Price makes its way upriver towards Lake Huron, second mate Howard Mackley blows the ship whistle for his wife Evelyn on shore. It is a tradition they have shared since their wedding 17 months earlier. Not far behind is skipper Ed McConkey and his Canadian package freighter, the Regina. As the day continues, weather systems over Lake Superior move south. The storm grows in strength.
It not only deepened tremendously, it slowed up. Boy, that's why you had such strong winds on the lakes for so long. I mean, you're looking at 16 hours of 60 to 70 mile-an-hour winds.
On the east coast of Lake Huron, the James C. Carruthers heads for the shelter of Georgian Bay. Captain William Wright orders his wheelsman to make the critical turn that will put them on course into the bay. Not far away, the Regina is also heading north. But Captain Ed McConkey is concerned, and he decides to turn back toward Sarnia.
I think that my father was not an extremely excitable man. He loved it. He loved the ship. He loved his crew. So I think that he'd feel that he could handle it.
In making a turn in heavy seas, there is the danger of getting caught in the valley that forms between the waves. Now, with the winds and waves moving in different directions, the ship stays broadside, helplessly drifting in the rolling trough. Captain Ed McConkey tells his crew to prepare for the worst.
You have 30-foot seas in those lakes, and you're fighting for your own life to try and keep your vessel afloat.
At home, Captain McConkey's wife and family wait for word that the Regina is safely into port.
My mother said that she was not worried. She knew that there was a very bad storm. She felt confident that she would get a telephone call from him saying that he was okay. And they waited and waited for that long-distance call, and it never came.
Meanwhile, along the Canadian coast of lower Lake Huron, Captain Bruce Cameron guides the Wexford south through icy seas.
The Wexford was apparently trying to make Goderich Harbor, but Goderich Harbor is a very difficult harbor to get into if there's any sea running.
There were several reports about whistles being blown from the Wexford. That night, there were residents in the town of Goderich and employees along the waterfront who reported hearing bells and whistles again, or seeing lights even, which would indicate that she was still there, still waiting to have the storm abate and make port.
The storm does not abate for another 24 hours, long after distress signals from the Wexford fade into the night. Monday, November 10th, 1913. The station captain at Port Huron spots the hull of a ship on the horizon. It is a lake freighter floating bottom side up, its name and identity shrouded by murky water. It is dubbed the Mystery Ship, a riddle to be solved in the aftermath of the Great Storm. Tuesday, November 11th, 1913. A farmer walking along the Canadian shoreline of Lake Huron sees something in the water. It is the body of a young sailor from the Wexford, frozen in the icy waters. It is the first body that washes ashore. His shipmates soon follow, along with debris from the small steamer.
There's a documented report of a life jacket hanging in a tree on top of the bank from a site near Bayfield. And from that point south, we have bodies and other material from the Wexford, including one of the lifeboats.
10 days after the storm, a piece of wood washes ashore near Goderich. On it is a brief, tragic message.
I am with the boat, lashed to the wheel.
It is signed simply B by Wexford Captain Bruce Cameron. The young skipper's body is never found. In the grim week that follows, bodies continue to wash up on Great Lakes shorelines. The body of Emily Walker, a cook on the steamer Argus, is found wearing a life jacket with the word Captain stenciled on it. When the body of the Argus skipper washes ashore, it is without a life preserver.
The amount of wreckage that had come ashore was incredible. These ships were carrying lumber, they were carrying whiskey, they were carrying any household good you could think of. And all of this material was coming ashore in great piles.
As more wreckage drifts in, it brings with it the unthinkable, that the grandest ship on the Great Lakes has gone down.
It's difficult to say what happened to the Carruthers because this was a brand new ship. She may have grounded out and poked a hole in her bottom that nobody noticed until it was too late.
Soon after, a body is found with a familiar beard and a ring with the initials WW. It is the Carruthers captain, William Wright. North of Sarnia, 2 bodies come ashore in a lifeboat from the Regina. 11 more bodies are found close by. Some are identified as crewmen from the Regina, but others are from the Charles S. Price, the first evidence that this freighter has been lost as well. All the bodies are taken by wagons to makeshift morgues in nearby towns.
In the morning, 2 of my uncles boarded the train and went to Goderich, where many of the bodies had been washed up. They went to see if they could find my father's body, but they returned home that they had not found it.
Many more arrive in Goderich with the sad task of identifying loved ones. Evelyn Mackley comes looking for her husband, Howard, second mate on the Charles S. Price. She never finds him. A week later, she receives a love letter from her husband, mailed just before his last trip. Milton Smith, the assistant engineer whose intuition told him to leave the Price, is asked to identify dead shipmates. He recognizes his old chief engineer, John Groundwater.
And the coroner looked at him and said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Sure, I worked with this guy, I know this man, this is John Groundwater." I said, "Well, can you tell us why I was wearing a Regina life jacket?" A number of bodies came ashore with Regina life jackets on them, although they were from the Charles S. Price.
Some speculate that the Price and the Regina collided in the storm, and that life preservers were exchanged in the confusion. That theory is discarded on November 15th, when a diver identifies the mystery ship still floating upside down in Lake Huron. It is the Charles S. Price. There is no evidence of a collision, and no sign of the Regina close by. Some wonder if the Regina didn't come upon the Price in trouble and try to help.
It's not impossible that the Regina saw the Charles Price go over, saw the men in the water, steamed as close as they dared, and threw life jackets to them for them to get into a lifeboat and attempt to rescue. That is really a remarkable act of courage, if it did indeed happen. We'll never know if it happened.
It is almost a year before the McConkey family is able to lay the skipper of the Regina to rest.
The following summer, his body was washed up on the shores of Michigan. He was still wearing his fur-lined coat, and in his pockets he had several things that he had treasured. One of them was his diary and his gold watch. And my sister Amy writes about that occasion, and she describes my mother standing at the top of the hill waiting for the wagon, or hearse, it would be a hearse. She described my mother as looking happy. She said, I wondered why she could be smiling. But she said, your father's coming home, Amy.
In terms of ships and crews lost, the storm of 1913 is the worst in Great Lakes history. 12 ships are at the bottom of the lakes, and up to 40 more in need of repair. The exact number of dead will never be known. Ship owners and skippers blame inadequate forecasts and storm warnings, while the weather bureaus maintain that posted storm signals were ignored by ship captains.
It took 19 ships, 250 plus lives.
An inquest leads to recommendations for improvements in the future.
I think it cleaned up the way weather reports were communicated to sailors. I think it did lead to some improvements in lights and lighthouses along the lakes generally.
For years, the location of many of the lost ships remains a mystery. One riddle is finally solved in 1986 by a diver who finds his gear snagged on an anchor chain.
The diver followed the anchor chain back to a ship, and the ship was lying on its side, and that was the SS Regina. and she was lying within a mile of the shore.
In 2000, a fisherman using an electronic fish finder locates the biggest catch of all, the wreck of the Wexford, upright and perfectly preserved 120 kilometers off Huron's south shore.
The way she sits today, she has no rudder, and she has a large chunk out of one propeller blade, so that would tell me that somewhere along the line she either struck bottom or through a combination of the wave action and rolling, her rudder was thrown out of the shoe and broken off, and she lost steerage.
It changed the face of shipping on the Great Lakes. The lakes now had the respect of people who, prior to that, thought, well, these are only mud puddles. When in reality, I've known men who've gone around Cape Horn and say sailing in Georgian Bay, sometimes worse.
Along the Great Lakes, the gales of November continue to blow, and from time to time, ships are still lost. 5 ships lost in the Great Storm of 1913 have yet to be found. But those who sailed them are still remembered on both the Canadian and American side of the lakes.